I'm submitting my encounter to you because I too have had a horrifying experience with a werewolf-like creature, just as you described in many of your encounter videos. Here's mine. I have been hearing strange noises and sounds outside of our house for weeks now, on and off, before I actually saw what the cause of it was. The sounds were like a really large animal groaning outside. It was strange. My husband works late, so he doesn't get home till closer to midnight every night. One night, during the week, this thing must have walked by and ticked the motion sensor on, and that's when I saw it. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I thought at the time that if I turned on all the lights in the house, maybe it would deflect this thing from wanting to get in. My husband arrived home a little earlier that evening, and my husband was furious that all the lights were on. I never actually told him why I had all the lights on, because I don't think he would have believed me. He probably did not see what I did, because he acted very normal, but he thought I was strange for having all the lights on, and I told him the darkness was getting to me. He just kind of smirked and laughed about it, and thought I was acting very strange. This is still going on to this very day, and I don't know how to break it to him. He is a very stern, no-nonsense science kind of guy, and would believe that kind of thing, unless he thought for himself. The sounds don't appear outside of our house every single night, but they are often. It's that weird animal groaning noise. Imagine like a large animal, like a moose or a horse, who has had a bad raspy smoker's cough, is giving birth, or pushing something out of its birth canal. I know, it's a bizarre description, but it's the only way I know how to describe the noise. There's a lot of strange development around here too, and we're not surrounded by woods or forest like many people who encounter these creatures are. I have no idea where it's coming from, and why it's targeting our house and us. Ever since this whole COVID-19 thing has taken place, things have gone a little crazy, and it wasn't until around April this year that this has all started happening. Maybe you can find a way to help me break it to my husband that we have a nightly visitor, a Dogman. I used to live in Maine for a while, way back in the day, when me and my neighbors all saw the largest coyote that we've ever seen in our lives. Here's the kicker though. We would often all see it walking around on its hind legs. That was enough for each of us, and we thought we were going crazy until we kept frequently seeing it. Some of us described it as a large dog or wolf, while others just described it as the largest coyote they've ever seen. Same color, same stature, same build, everything. That's how we began to notice we weren't crazy. This is how I would best describe it. The neighborhood we were in was near a heavy amount of forest, so we think this thing would come in and out of that whole area and would go through our neighborhood. We would all often see it running a nearby field that bordered the neighborhood. We had a huge amount of deer that would frequent the area, so I don't know if that had any part to play. I guess if we're talking in terms of zoology, if that is the right term, since I'm not a scientist or biologist, whatever, that would mean that the high deer population would give way for a massive food supply. So it's only natural that predators who feed off deer would be drawn to the area. But I don't recall ever seeing a cougar or anything like that, not even a mountain lion. None of us have ever had any problems with animals in the area, let alone this problem. I've listened to a few of your Dogman shows, and to my recollection, I've never had anything close to violent or terrifying with such an animal. The other neighbors that I talked to about seeing this same creature had the same conclusion I did. I think we all just realized it was there to feed on the deer, because it never tried approaching our houses or coming onto our land to do anything to us. I firmly believe it was just a large predator. We might potentially be seeing direwolves coming back to life that people are mistaking as dogmen. Maybe direwolves also just happen to walk on their hind legs too for a short time. I mean, it is very possible. Until anybody catches a live specimen of one of these things, really anything and everything is kind of just up in the air. My grandfather and my mother lived a little bit out in the countryside while she grew up. My mother was an only child, and my grandmother passed away shortly after my mother was born, so it was just the two of them, roughing it out by themselves. My grandfather had a large chicken coop, 50 chickens to be exact, and 13 acres of land in backwoods, and she was basically raised on a farm. Their house was right next to the woods, and right next to a cemetery. She absolutely loved walking to the woods around the cemetery, especially after dark. She even went so far as to walk down into the cemetery at night because she enjoyed how quiet and how spooky it got. My mother had a saying that she almost never told, but that you should always carry a light with you wherever you go, even in the daytime. On the nights when she was just a kid, probably 8 or 10, she described these eyes staring back at her from around the cemetery. Those eyes were attached to something much larger, a shadow that resembled that of a large standing dog. My mother believed for a long time that those eyes were indeed those of a werewolf. Even though it scared my mother, she still kept going down there at night because she was curious as much as she was afraid and wanted to see if she could make friends with this monster, or so she told me at the time. She tried telling her father, aka my grandfather, and he told her it wasn't a werewolf, and she was just probably trying to pull his leg. My mother kept going down there after dark and seeing this large shadow moving around the cemetery, but never being brave enough to actually get close enough to talk to it. She said that she would always get too scared and end up running away. It would only ever appear there at nighttime. She tried to tell her dad several times about this being there, but he just wouldn't believe her. At one point or another, he threatened severe punishment because she was just making things up and wouldn't stop the storytelling. This is when he had a sighting all of his own. That night, my mother went to bed, and he was sitting out on the porch smoking pipe tobacco when he noticed all the crickets and frogs he would normally be hearing making lots of noise around them were dead quiet. Even the chickens were quiet, and even they would sometimes be making noise. Then, out of the darkness, he saw what looked to be a tall figure standing by the trees, watching him. This figure had red eyes. All he could see was this large silhouette shadow and the eyes. It really frightened him. After that happened, the next day, he forbid my mother from ever going back down there to the cemetery after that night. My mother doesn't have much memory after that of seeing this creature again, but she did not know what it was for the longest time. I thought that werewolves were an actual real creature, she's told me. Later on in life, as more information came out about cryptids like Bigfoot, she began to believe that these were actual things that lived. Then, she started hearing about the whole Wisconsin werewolf thing, the Beast of Bray Road, etc., and all the Linda Godfrey stories and narrations. As she was able to get more and more stories from people who had seen similar creatures, she realized that this was a Dogman that was visiting her. Some quick information on the cemetery that was near her house. It didn't belong to her family or anything. I believe it was just a tiny community cemetery that they just happened to live by. My mother said it was maybe a 5-minute walk at best from her back porch through some small woods. That small patch of woods was really the only thing separating the cemetery from her property. Because of where they lived and the road they lived on, that cemetery hardly if ever got any traffic, and mainly belonged to the many of the older people that had passed living in the area from long before. When I tell this story to people, most just laugh and say, no, that couldn't have been a werewolf. It couldn't be a Dogman, they say. But this did happen, and I saw it. For the very first time on that dark night, I played tag with my brothers. Long story short, I saw a werewolf creature coming back towards us from the woods. My younger brother saw it first. Then I saw the wolf. We all got scared and ran back to the house. At the time, there was acres and acres of undeveloped land behind our house. It's now either an apartment complex or a strip mall. Probably both. At the time, it was just a bunch of mess of overgrown weeds, blackberry bramble, and trees with those orange markings on them to signal which trees they were going to start taking out. The development of that land did not start till after we moved out, and we were there for roughly 6 years. But this particular night was when we saw what we call the werewolf, because that's what it resembled closest. We played night tag often, and never had a sighting like this before, until my younger brother saw it, just like I said. It was coming towards us slowly, like it was trying to be sneaky. I don't know what it was planning on, but it was being sneaky, and it was out in the open, which frightened all of us. Once we all saw it, we thought it was a person in a costume, but it moved wrong, and it was just way too big to be somebody dressed in a costume. We all screamed and ran back to the house. My younger brother tried telling my mom, but she didn't believe us, whereas me and my older brother kept our mouths shut and didn't say a word. This was in September, right before we were about to start school up again, and things were just starting to cool off. We didn't really go back there the rest of the school year until the following spring and summer, when we were able to play tag again at night. Never had another sighting of this creature ever again, even if it was back there in secret watching us play. When I think back on these memories, I think, what if it had grabbed one of us? Had my little brother not seen it moving out from behind a tree in the open? There's no telling what could have happened. This thing also made no noise, and it was just by luck he saw it. Probably for the better.